All right, check the mic. We're live with the breaking news. Sam Darnold has made a decision. He is signing with the Seattle Seahawks, 3 years, a little over $110 million for Sam Darnold in Seattle. Sam, I said, hey, I can't wait to see what happens. They just traded Geno Smith for a third rounder a couple days ago. What was the plan in Seattle? The reports were that it was going to be a full court press on Sam Darnold, and that's what we have. Seattle and Sam Darnold.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of different reports out there. Tom Palazzolo saying that Geno Smith essentially turned down a similar contract. And that's why they ended up trading him away, picking up the third round pick. The Raiders get their guy. And now the Seahawks did end up getting Darnold. So 3 years, $110 million. I mean, that's pretty good business, actually. I'm sort of surprised that Darnold's market wasn't stronger than that. On the other hand, I get why it wasn't, based off like how the season ended and the rest of his career, right? And this was always the difficulty in projecting Darnold and figuring out where he was going to land. Was he going to stay in Minnesota? Well, like, what would the contract look like? 3 years, $110 million. We're talking $35 million a year ish. It's probably going to end up looking more like a 2-year deal, which ends up being sort of decent money. Like, that kind of makes sense, right? It's like it's modest money if you look at over 3 years. If you look at it over 2 years, it's probably pretty high end money, but it gives them a quicker out if Darnold spectacularly implodes again. It makes sense.
It's similar to what they had in Geno Smith previously a couple years ago. It's similar to what the Baker Mayfield deal, and that's the guy that Sam Darnold has been compared to this entire time. Former high draft pick. I know Geno was a second rounder, but former high draft pick. Very little success in his first stop, much like Geno Smith. Baker had more success in his first stop, but then bounced around the league, was a backup, bit of an afterthought for a while, had the starting opportunity, and comes good. And look, you could make the argument. I know how it finished for Sam Darnold. I know. You could make the argument that his one season this year was better than anything Geno Smith put together with Seattle, and better than anything Baker Mayfield put together with Tampa Bay. You could make that argument. I think that's a fair argument. The guy was somewhat in the MVP race right up until the end. The problem with the end is it wasn't just a bad game. It was a bad game with, I don't know, shades of his 2018 and 19 first and second season. So Sam Darnold to Seattle, and, an aggressive move by them, moving on from Geno Smith and kind of going to the next Geno Smith-esque type of player.
I mean, look, a couple of weeks out, he was legitimately, not in the MVP conversation in terms of winning it, but in the world where it's a ranked choice of 5, he was, I think,
you mentioned his name.
Yeah, he was in the argument in terms of you could rank him 5, right? I don't think that was egregious. Having said that, the collapse was so bad that he ended up with a PFF passing grade the same as Russell Wilson for the season. So it's like it wasn't just a little bit of a wobble at the end. It was like he careened off into a building to end the season in the 2 most important games that the Vikings had. And again, that's why projecting what he was going forward is so fascinating. And honestly, I think it kind of I want to see the way this contract is structured to find out exactly what we're talking about for Darnold. But look, if the Seahawks get anything approaching, let's say, the modal baseline of play that he had last year, right? The average game that he had last season. If they get anything approaching that, they've at the very minimum maintained the level they were at with Geno and maybe taken a step forward with Darnold. Now, you've got to combat that with they traded away DK Metcalf, so you have one fewer decent receiver to play with. Tyler Lockett has gone because he's sort of reached that age, fallen off a cliff. They've moved on from him, but he has fewer weapons right now than Geno Smith had a year ago. So look, the second the Geno Smith deal happened, and I was asking, look, what's the plan, right? I don't understand what the strategy is right now. And even if it's Darnold, you don't have him in the building yet. Well, they have him in the building now. They've got him under contract. TBD on exactly what that contract looks like. 3 years, $110 million can be a variety of different things that I think are actually quite different in approach. But in abstract terms, Darnold answers that question, right? They now have a quarterback again, and now you got to go setting about the things you needed to set about, which is let's get a DK replacement. Let's find interior offensive line help. Otherwise, whoever the quarterback is getting wrecked.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier today, one of the more intriguing teams now, Seattle, in part because I wanted to see what happened at quarterback. So now they get Sam Darnold. All right, we got that solved. Now you go into the draft with 10 picks, 5 out of the top 82, 83. I mean, at least 5 in the top 100, 2 twos, 2 threes, pick 18 overall. No DK Metcalf, true, and no Tyler Lockett. So, it's a completely new receiving core. Jackson Smith and Jigba was fantastic down the stretch, but that was with DK Metcalf there, right? So can he truly be that the top target? You need someone else there. So, yeah, I can't wait to see what Seattle does. I'm still intrigued by what Seattle does. The offensive line, right? The same thing that fell apart for Minnesota was the interior of the offensive line when Sam Darnold had those rough couple games against the Lions and against the Rams in the playoffs. So Seattle's going to have to make those same moves. They've got work to do on the interior of the O-line. They've got pass catchers that they need to take care of. I think the defense is close. They've been loading up on the interior of the defensive line. They're rolling pretty deep, I think, on the defensive line as far as depth goes. The secondary can be outstanding with Tariq Woolen and Devin Witherspoon anchoring it. So, again, we went into this offseason saying they've got a pretty good roster. I'm going to call it essentially a lateral move. Sam Darnold and Geno Smith, right? That's a lateral move with long-term security, so to speak, right? You at least have Darnold locked up. You didn't have that with Geno Smith. I don't know. That's one of those things. I used to, a couple of years ago, I put out a poll. Who would you rather have, Derek Carr or Jameis Winston? And everybody thought I was crazy, but it was like a 50-50 split on what the answer was. But they both thought I was crazy. So I'm going to put that statement out there, and everybody's going to – it's a lateral move, Sam Darnold and Geno Smith. And there's going to be Geno fans thinking I'm crazy. There's going to be Darnold fans thinking I'm crazy. Is that wrong?
No, you're right. Like everyone thinks you're an idiot for asking, but for about 50% of them think you're an idiot for one person, and the other 50% think you're an idiot for the other person. Look, I think
Twitter poll
it's funny because you can argue that it's like a lateral move, right? That they're basically the same player from a quality standpoint, but I think they're very different in how they play. So it might be a lateral move in overall abstract, big picture terms. But I do think in Darnold, you get a quarterback that is better suited for, a Clint Kubiak type of offense. I mean, again, the relationship of systems, it bears a closer resemblance to the one he was just in. I think Darnold doesn't have the crippling red zone problems that Geno Smith has, right? Like Geno has arguably been a better quarterback between the 20s, but in the red zone, he turns into a significantly worse player, which does appear to be a consistent, career-long flaw in him. Darnold doesn't have that. So, it might be a lateral move overall, but I do think the way you're constructing two similar players is very different.
No, I agree on the Kubiak thing. I wanted to make that point as well. It's all the West Coast tree. It's a similar Shanahan-McVay connection. Darnold's just played under Shanahan, and he just played under Kevin O'Connell. Just played under coaches with similar ideas, similar structure. And look, here's one more similarity between Darnold and Geno Smith. I've complimented both guys for what I always call the amnesia, the ability to bounce back from difficult plays, right? As bad as Geno Smith was in the red zone, and as every time, because of their history, Sam, I think every time they made a big mistake, it just an alarm goes off, right? Like, uh-oh, is this it? The same way Darnold has 2 bad games, and it's like, uh-oh, did he just lose it completely? We only have 15 games of good evidence, and did he just lose it in his last 2 and revert back to what he was? Those are fair questions for guys who kind of are late bloomers. But every time that alarm went off in my head for Geno Smith or Sam Darnold, they bounce back. Whether it was one bad play or one bad game, they always bounce back. But we don't have that evidence yet for Darnold, right? Seattle's paying for that, to see that evidence over the next couple of years.
And he did bounce back kind of within the season, right? Like those last 2 games weren't the only poor performances we saw from Darnold. Like up until that point, that had been actually a pretty good characteristic for Darnold, that within games he had bounced back from bad decisions. And then even week to week, he had bounced back from rough games and played really well. The last 2 games were the first 2 examples where that didn't happen. It's like, we had been praising him for that resiliency and that ability to actually, this is different to New York Jets Sam Darnold, to Carolina Sam Darnold, where the wheels threatened to come off multiple times during the season, and they didn't. And everyone was waiting for that to happen, right? All the way through the year. We were like, how many weeks do we give this before we decide this is different from the rest of his career? And then eventually we just about been like, okay, it seems to be for real now, right? Let's just enjoy the ride and let's see what happens. And then the wheels did completely, well and truly fall off in spectacular fashion. And we don't get to see what, like, now the first thing we're going to see in terms of, is that a permanent thing? Was that just 2 weeks that happened to the worst 2 weeks possible? We're not going to know that until, September for a different team.
Just more context to add around the Sam Darnold thing. It was a bit for us on the show, but last year, early in the season, Sam Darnold had only really played in 3-week stretches. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the reality, right? Where he would have 3 weeks at a time, often early in the season, his first few starts, and then kind of came back down to earth, which is why we were keeping an eye out for that, watching for it. And when it popped up, we noted it, and then he'd bounce back, as we kept saying. So we're close to that. The other piece of context that I think is important for Darnold with Minnesota, thrown to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, who emerged as one of the top number 2 receivers in the NFL, probably a 1 for a lot of teams. TJ Hawkinson, once he came back from his injury, really nice trio of pass catchers, and Kevin O'Connell. Now leaving Kevin O'Connell, who has 2 quarterbacks of evidence of elevating them, Sam Darnold and Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, perennially a 500 quarterback, was like a 700 quarterback for Kevin O'Connell. Darnold, a 350 winning percentage coming in or whatever it was, and then winning 14 games. So those are real things, right? Those are real things to consider. Doesn't mean you immediately revert back, right? The Baker Mayfield question was, what will Baker Mayfield do without Dave Canales? Well, he was fine with Liam Cohen, if not better. And Liam Cohen now has a head coaching job too. So now Baker Mayfield goes from coaches getting fired left and right to all of a sudden he's making head coaches. So these things can revert back. But I just think that evidence is really important when you're discussing Sam Darnold. Indoor environment, good pass catchers, good play caller, and Kevin O'Connell led to one of the best statistical seasons in the NFL last season.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. Like that, it's starting to look like Kevin O'Connell is one of those guys that can consistently elevate the play and potentially even change the way a quarterback plays. Now, I don't think you can necessarily say he did that with Jared Goff when he was the Rams offense coordinator. Obviously, confounding factors there because McVay
though. It's still
is,
McVay.
McVay is the guy in Los Angeles. But if, it would have been another piece of evidence if Goff had also had that like resurgent, his best season with the Rams in one of the years that Kevin O'Connell was there, that would have been a nice data point in that direction as well. But yeah, it's definitely another risk, right? Taking Darnold off that team and expecting him to do similar things in a new environment without Kevin O'Connell there. There's a lot of reasons to see this as a risk. And that's why the structure of the contract to me is really interesting. 3 years, 110 million could be a variety of different contract structures that last a variety of different years and have different levels of risk.
There's breaking news right now. I don't know if you want to do a whole separate video on it or just touch on Justin Fields signing with the New York Jets. Multiple sources. We have a deleted tweet out there, but they're all coming back now. Is Fields worth his own video, Sam? Do we come back or do we talk about it now? QB's carousel, where everything is right now.
I mean, I think Fields is worth his own video.
Fine. We're going to make you come back to a separate video because I was going to ask the question, what do the next QB needy teams, what do they do right now, right? The Colts have been in this market potentially for a quarterback to compete with Anthony Richardson. They're supposed to be going after Daniel Jones. Vikings want to bring Daniel Jones back. The Jets were the other big-time QB needy team, and of course the Giants and the Steelers. So there's still a few teams out there. Aaron Rodgers remains out there, but if Fields is with the Jets, another domino in the QB carousel here. Anything else on Darnold, though, to wrap it up before we reset and discuss Justin Fields?
I mean, Darnold himself, I think, is a huge question mark right now. If they get the high-end version of Darnold, it's a good move. They got younger, and he took the contract that Geno Smith didn't want to take effectively, right? So they nailed the guy that they were expected to get when they traded away Geno. They picked up a third-round pick. In addition to that, all good business. We don't know that Darnold will be that guy, and I think it's definitely a gamble to hope that he will, given how spectacularly the season ended for him.
I'll say it's a similar gamble that they made on Geno Smith a couple years ago. We didn't know exactly. He was pretty good in a relief role for Russell Wilson. They gave him the starting opportunity, and he came good in 2022.
With the added differences of you're asking him to change team, throw to new people, different offense,
True.
albeit a similar one. Like there's a lot of new elements to the risk as well.
All right, man. Sam Darnold to the Seahawks. I'm calling him the most fascinating team in the NFL this offseason. They got Darnold and 5 picks, pretty high in the draft. Can't wait to see what Seattle continues to do to build around Sam Darnold.